Thunderbirds are go.
The swimming pool retracts, the palm trees fall back, the sofa descends into the ground. 3 of the key images from Thunderbirds that have lingered in the minds of the public for decades. One of the reasons these moments have endured, beyond being visually striking offbeat images, is the constant reuse of footage throughout the series. For the adults making the show, a cunning cost-cutting exercise. For the children in the audience, the highlight of each instalment. However, although it often seems like it was the same footage used throughout the show, there were variations. Sometimes alternative angles, sometimes alternative takes, and sometimes longer ones. This week we'll be looking at the launch sequence for Thunderbird 1, presenting not just rare imagery, but a breakdown of every stage of the launch. Plus, after comparing the launches across every episode, we've assembled the longest possible versions of each shot. Now, you have every right to judge us at this point for being sad anoraks with nothing better to do. But who clicked on the link? Now, the launch sequences for Thunderbirds 1 and 2, along with the shots of the island, were done at the beginning of the series as part of the production of Trapped in the Sky. Various tests were done to determine the best looks to pursue before the individual components were filmed. These bits were then supplied to the editors, who would use as much or as little as they wanted, although it seems like there may have been a standard sequence for them to use if they so wished, as sometimes the shots remain accurate to the frame across different episodes. These shots could be extended or shortened as needed. The first part of the launch is, of course, Scott standing against the revolving door in the lounge. In the series, there are 2 versions of this shot. This, closer shot, was only used in Trapped in the Sky, while most of the rest of the series made use of this wider shot. There was almost a third variant used, which appeared in the rejected Hour version of Pit of Peril, but this was dropped when the story was later reworked. Much later, a couple of alternatives were filmed. Scott talking during the turn for The Man from MI5 and Then Cry Wolf, plus the reverse when he returns in Operation Crash Dive and Danger at Ocean Deep. The second shot is of Scott now on the other side of the wall. 2 versions of this were used. For most episodes, this variant, where one of the wires catches Scott's eyebrow, and another where the eyebrows are left unmolested. Then we cut to our first magnificent view of Thunderbird 1, and get to see the health and safety nightmare sheer drop in front of Scott. Although if Scott had fallen off, he could have engaged international rescue on their favourite pastime, rescuing themselves, which happens more often than reasonable. This shot, bar change of length, remains consistent throughout the series. However, in the test strips of this sequence, we can see that another higher angle version was considered that ultimately went unused. Consideration was also given to a close-up of the plasticine figure on the platform, which was, judging by this, perhaps fortunately dropped. The shot of Scott crossing on the Gantry is also consistently a single shot, with the longest versions being found in End of the Road, and once again, the unbroadcast Pit of Peril, which we've combined here. The background is the studio wall, as can be seen in these behind-the-scenes photographs. The rather oddly shaped nose cone looks even odder when we zoom out to reveal the full frame and see that the point is missing, which some of you may be saying about this video right now. Usually there's a cutaway to something else at this point, before returning to Thunderbird 1 for its descent into the silo. There are 3 variants of this shot, seen across 32 episodes. This version, with lights on the left-hand side only, was seen in the overwhelming majority of episodes. However, this version, with lights on both sides, was seen in Edge of Impact. And a third variant, at an angle, appears in Day of Disaster only. And if we go back to the test strips, we can see that there was a 4th version shot in which the camera remained stationary. This side shot, where Thunderbird 1 makes its infamous quarter rotation, is the same shot used throughout the show. Once we enter the launch silo, we have 2 alternative angles to choose from. The first variant is the main one used, which is split into 2 parts. First the entry into the silo, and then after a cutaway to Scott, the second section where the machine takes up its final position. The second version of this shot is at a wider angle, sections of which are used in City of Fire, The Mighty Atom, and Day of Disaster. But once again, we get an even longer section in the untransmitted Pit of Peril, seeing an extended version of the tunnel descent. The cutaway to Scott comes in 3 versions. The first, used only in Trapped in the Sky, sees Scott pulling the levers towards him. The rest of the series sees the levers being pushed away, for which you have 2 versions to choose from. Once Thunderbird 1 is in position, there are a couple of variants in which the rocket is poised before takeoff. One of these is a simple extension of the familiar takeoff shot, but another, at an angle, using edge of impact and security hazard, is unusual because it's the only instance of the lemon juice extractor fan being illuminated. Now, before the takeoff, let's have a look at the swimming pool opening. There are only two variants of this shot, a wide and a close-up, smoothly being opened by Brian Johnson, as seen in this picture here. There are two versions of the takeoff shot, the one used in the titles and in every episode Thunderbird 1 launches in, Bar Terror in New York City that is, where we get Blast-Off from the lesser used angle. And it's at this point we should address the quarter angle rotation again, often put down to mere continuity error. Not unfairly, given the occasionally cavalier attitude to continuity in the series. It would seem that it was a deliberate decision by the crew to have the Thunderbird 1 lettering always facing the audience. As we can see in these test strips, the craft was tried at different angles, albeit seemingly the rocketless takeoffs were entirely static. These test strips run to 6 frames each, and while it doesn't allow us to see the shot in full, 6 frames is enough to tell us about whether the shot was static or not. For instance, here we see 6 frames of Thunderbird 1 in flight, and the clouds are clearly moving. Whereas if we do the same for these shots of Thunderbird 1 suspended in mid-air here, there's no discernible motion. So the sequence was very carefully planned out. On the other side of the pool, we have 2 shots to choose from. This angled one, where on the full frame we can also see the studio wall, and this straight-on view used far less frequently. The camera tilt-up comes in 2 versions, the regular one, and this very wobbly shot which surely got into 30 minutes afternoon by mistake. The first shot also gives us a glimpse of the backing, although once again this would have been invisible to viewers as it would have been masked on broadcast.
International rescue from Thunderbird 1. Changing to horizontal flight.
The transition into horizontal flight is, again, always the same shot, but with differences in length. This shot initially posed us in 2015 a slight problem when we adapted the mini-album FAB into The Abominable Snowman, as Scott talks during this sequence on the album.
To Thunderbird 1. Penny's position is reference 421X037.
FAB, Dad. Speed 7.5 thousand miles per hour. ETA 1805 local time.
The final shot is of Thunderbird 1 going into horizontal flight. The longest versions are found in Danger at Ocean Deep, A Pit of Peril. The Thunderbird 1 launch sequence was entirely reshot in Technoscope for Thunderbirds Are Go, where this time someone decided against the quarter rotation, and the sequence was again partially reshot for Thunderbird 6, back to facing camera again. The reason for reshooting for Thunderbird 6, rather than use the version done for Thunderbirds Are Go, was probably to avoid having to make a dupe negative of the Thunderbirds Are Go sequence, which would have caused a substantial drop in quality, which was a big problem in the pre-digital age. Most release prints were already 4 generations down, as the standard pattern was to 1. Assemble the negative footage, that's to say, the film that was in the camera, selecting the final takes to be used in the episode, as chosen by the editor, and removing all the unwanted bits into a complete film. 2. Produce a master positive version of the film with all the colours adjusted, called the interpositive. 3. Then produce a negative version of that, called the internegative, from which 4, all release prints would be produced.
5, 4...
So dupe sequences were often considered undesirable due to the quality loss, as the process took you even further away from the first generation negative. You can often see the quality drop at fades, where we cut from a first generation negative to a dupe with the fade printed in. Much more rarely used was the return to base landing sequence, which appeared only in The Perils of Penelope, Edge of Impact, Danger at Ocean Deep, Cry Wolf, and Security Hazard. The first shot is the wire's highly visible return to vertical flight, for which we have 2 variations. Then usually we go direct to the descent into the pool. However, Cry Wolf gives us a close-up shot of the fuselage, filmed much later, as the craft completes its rotation to vertical flight. Only in Edge of Impact do we see the sequence run without music, to emphasise the secret nature of the launches while Tim Casey is on the island. The rest of the time, the launch is accompanied by variants of the Thunderbirds theme. The original Trapped in the Sky theme, which was written to sound lighter than the Thunderbird 2 theme, was only used with the launch in Trapped in the Sky and one other time in Danger at Ocean Deep. The rest of the time, the sequence used alternative themes, including this theme, which was originally composed for Thunderbird 2 in The Perils of Penelope. And now, to conclude the film, here's the entire sequence in its longest form, with all the variant shots.
International rescue from Thunderbird 1. Changing to horizontal flight.
In the next Thunderbirds Unseen extra, we'll be looking at the Thunderbird 2 launch sequence, once again helped by rare imagery.